Today's daf Be'ezus Hashem is Masechta Bava Metzia daf Kuf Beis. We are beginning on daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis by the Mishnah. Okay, Kuf Aleph Amud Beis by the Mishnah, and here is the rights of a renter versus the rights of a landlord. That's what we're discussing. Hamaske Bais Lechavere. A landlord rents a house to his friend. Says the Mishnah on daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Chayev Hamaske Chayev. The landlord is required to provide badelis, a door, nagar, an inner lock, ubamana, an outer lock, of a chol dover, anything for the apartment shemaisa umam that you would require a professional to install. So a sink or plumbing or things like that is on the obligation of the landlord to provide. Says the Mishnah, something that is not a required in professional installation. It's not something that needs to be done by professional. Then the renter has to provide. So, and the Mishnah and the Bryce is going to give examples of that. The Mishnah also says that when you rent a house, usually their houses used to have in front of their house like a common courtyard shared with other people who have houses in those townhouses. So there was a common courtyard. But anyway, if this one had a specific courtyard in front of this house, hazevel shel balabayis. If someone dumped manure, if a stranger dumped manure into that courtyard, it really belongs to the landlord. Why? Because when you rent the house, you're only renting the rights to pass through the courtyard to get to the house, but you're not renting the courtyard. And therefore, any lucky find in that courtyard belongs to the landlord. The renter only has the ashes that come out from the oven and from the smaller oven, that belongs to the renter. I guess there was a small oven and in that courtyard, and when you rent the house, you're renting that oven as well. So any ashes that come out of that oven belong to the renter. That's the rights to the renter. So we'll see more about this in the Gemara. Tanar Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Hamaskir bais l'chaverei. Someone rents a house to his friend. Maskir, the landlord's chayv lahamad loy losos liftoich loy. He has to provide a door so that he could open and close with chaloinos or windows. Windows means that if you're going to be sleeping there, which obviously you are, you have to provide like any New York code. The bedrooms have to have a window, so you have to provide a window in the bedrooms. If the roof is falling in, you have to strengthen it. You have to pay to repair it, and also if the roof is sagging, to support it with a beam. That's what you have to do. But the renter, he has to make a ladder. Okay, he has to make a ladder to create like a gate around the roof so that nobody should chas v'shalom fall off. So that, according to the Gemara, that doesn't require a professional to do that. Anybody could do that. Lasis boy marziv. To make gutters, basically, so that the water flows off the roof easily. And the renter is required to tar the roof. In other words, during storms and things like that, the roof gets some of the tar comes off, so he has to provide that and just roof cement or whatever needs to be done. So they asked a question for Rav Sheshes. Mezuzah almi. Who is required to provide the mezuzah? Mezuzah. Hamarav Sharshia mezuzah. Hamarav Sharshia says mezuzah's chayvas hadarhu. It's the one that lives there. Darshan a pasuk beisecha derech biascha. Who's going into and out of the house? It's the renter. So it's obviously that the renter has to provide the mezuzah. So the question is, yes, the renter has to provide the mezuzah. El makoim mezuzah. Who has to provide the case of the mezuzah? Apparently, that they used to have. On the side of where you put a mezuzah, you had to need a professional to make an indentation in that side post so that you can place the mezuzah there. So who has to do that? Who has to make that hole there so you can put a mezuzah there? Amaluhu Rav Sheshes says Tanisa. We learned it. That's the Mishnah. Anything that doesn't require a professional to do. I say the renter has to do. This making the indentation on the side post, it's not the action of a professional, You don't need even that indentation. You need a special tool to make the indentation to the side post. Efshahu, you can get a possibility. We go to Kuf Beis Malv, Begufsa de Kanya. You can get this all done via put a case there, and if you put a case, that should be sufficient. So therefore, since that's not also so the mezuzah plus getting the case is also on the renter to do. Says the Mishnah to end the Brisa, Tanraban, the rabbis taught, Hamaska Baisa Chaveiroi, someone who rents a house to his friend, it's the renter that has to make the mezuzah. But when the renter provided the mezuzah and now vacates the apartment, he shouldn't take it out with his hands and go out. So because why shouldn't he take it out from his hands? I guess because the next renter is a Jew and he could use those mezuzahs. So you shouldn't be taking it and going out. Umigoy, but if you're renting, if the landlord is a goy, I'd say then you could take it and go and take the mezuzahs along with you. Probably he might rent to another guy. So there's no use of leaving the mezuzahs there after you're vacating the apartment. Says the Gemara, there was one story about a person, he took the mezuzahs with him as he, vacated the apartment, and went. His wife and two children died. So the Gemara says, Ma'isa Lister, that story seems to contradict what you just said. You just said from a goy, if you're renting from a goy, you can take it with your hand and leave. And now you're bringing a story about somebody who did do that, and he was punished by the death of his wife and his two children. And says the Gemara, the story is a proof, a support for the beginning. If you're renting a house from a Jew, when you leave, you shouldn't take it out. You shouldn't take the mezuzahs. And there was a story that somebody did take the mezuzahs out after he vacated the apartment, and he took the mezuzahs along with him. And Layalenu, his wife and two children passed. Says the Mishnah. So you have to know what the halacha is regarding these situations. Obviously, if you paid for the mezuzahs, you could charge the next renter to pay for the mezuzahs that you put in. We learned in the Mishnah, Hazevel shel balabayis ve'in lesoicher ela yotzim min hatanim min hakrayim bilbad. A manure drop, somebody dropped manure onto the courtyard, belongs to the landlord. But my asking, what are we talking about? Who dropped the manure? The renter rented the courtyard, and the ox belongs to the renter. So amai shel balabayis. Why does the manure belong to the landlord? And if we're talking about a courtyard that was not rented to the renter, and the ox that dropped the manure belonged to the landlord, pshita, of course it belongs to the landlord. So what is the Mishnah that we have to clarify? The Mishnah answers the Gemara, the Mishnah is talking about bechotzi the maskir. The courtyard was rented. It was not rented to the renter. It belongs to the landlord. The renter has a right to pass through that to get to his house that he's renting. But the use of the courtyard still remains in the landlord's domain. And somebody else dropped manure into the field, into that courtyard. So there, that lucky drop belongs to the landlord. This is a support to what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina's opinion. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, the courtyard of a person can acquire things even if you're not thinking about it. Somebody put something into your courtyard and you're not aware of it, you still acquired it. Says the Gemara Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Brisa says, if anybody says anything that's dropped into my courtyard from today, my courtyard should acquire it. The Brisa says, he doesn't. It's meaningless statement because your courtyard cannot acquire anything from you unless you're aware of when exactly it was dropped in, and you're probably standing right next to it. Vim Isa, if you hold true, what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, that if it's true what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, if what Rabbi Yossi said is true, that the courtyard of a person could make acquisitions on his behalf, even if he's not aware of it. So why can't I say that any findings that happen to land in my courtyard should acquire it. So why does the Brisa say that it doesn't work? And says the Gemara, and here we're discussing that it's an open courtyard, like any front lawn of that you find in any house on the block here. That's a chotzer, a courtyard, that's not watched, it's not fenced in, and a courtyard that's not fenced in will not acquire without your awareness. Only a chotzer that is fenced in, that is protected, if something happens to land into that courtyard, then you could acquire it. So the Gemara says, if we're talking about a chotzer she'ena mishtameres, if that's what that brisa is talking about, let us say the end of the brisa. If something was lost in the city and everybody knows that it landed in your property, so then your words to have effect and you acquired it. If we're dealing with a courtyard that's not fenced in and it's not protected, just because the name of Metzia, the story of something that landed in your property went around town, why should that make it that you acquired it? Simply, you should not be acquired it, because since you don't have a fenced-in property, anybody could pick it up and take it from you. So why are you acquiring it? Answers the Gemara, true that there's no fence around the property, and therefore you should not acquire it. But even the Yotzaloi Shem Metzia Be'er, since everybody knows that it landed in your property, there's something or another, let's say a bird dropped something of value. So everybody knows it landed in your property, even if there's no fence around your property, your courtyard. Mivdal bedila in Ashemine. People stay away from your courtyard. Havilei, and it automatically becomes like a courtyard that has a protective measure on it, because everybody knows it was in your property. So if somebody comes into your property and takes it, he'll be embarrassed to do so, because it's everybody knows that the lucky find ended up in your property, and therefore you could acquire it in that situation. Be that as it may, we're still with what Rabbi Yosef Hanini says. If you're dealing with a courtyard that has a fence around it, then even if you're not aware of it, if something lands in that courtyard, you acquire it. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. The Brisa says something that drops from the air. Okay, koilet mina aver means, let's say, in other words, before the animal it landed on the ground of your property, right? So you put like a big pail and it caught the manure as the animal was defecating. So the Brisa says, Harehu Shaloi. Then then it belongs to the renter. But the manure that's in the barn, that's in the courtyard, shel balabais, belongs to the landlord. Now, koilet min ha'aver means before it landed on the ground of the courtyard, we give a chance that if the renter put a pail there and caught it, therefore it belongs to the renter. That if you're going to tell me that the courtyard of a person acquires on his behalf, even if he's not aware of it, just because the renter caught it in the airspace of the courtyard, why do we say it belongs to the renter? Avir chatzeirehu. It's the airspace of the landlord's courtyard, and therefore it should really belong to the landlord, even if it didn't land on the ground of the courtyard. But the airspace of the courtyard still belongs to the landlord, and therefore why should we say that if the renter caught it in the airspace in a pail, then that it belongs to the renter? Abai said, that it's talking about he connected a vessel right on the back of the cow, so that it never really entered the airspace of the courtyard, and that's why the renter could keep it. That's what Abai says. Rava says, if it never would have, once it doesn't have to be exactly on the back of the animal, even if it's a distance from the back of the animal, since it never would have landed into the courtyard. So we don't give it as if it is in the courtyard rights, so to speak, and we say it really belongs to the renter. So the Gemara says, "Mi pshitele Rava." Does Rava hold that to be obvious? But the Rava had this question. The boy Rava had this question. Zarin anarchy bepes zev yatsa bepes zev. A guy threw a wallet, let's say, and it went right through somebody's house. It went through one window and it came out the other window. Maho, what's the din? Avish ain't sefer lenuach kamunach dami or lav kamunach dami, an airspace that it wasn't going to land in the house. Do we consider it as if it rested in the house, or is it not rested in the house? So Rava had this question, and Rava didn't answer that question. So how is it that in this case, where a guy just caught manure coming off an animal, Rava says for sure that's not considered as if it landed into the courtyard, and therefore would belong to the landlord. No, we say it belongs to the renter. So the Gemara says, Hasam over there, loy nifsik v'loy midi. There was no interruption. There is no interruption. Over there, there's no interruption. It goes through one window and it goes out the other window. So there was nothing separating the item that you threw, the arniki, from the ground underneath. It's just in the air. Here, in the manure's case, there was this vessel is right there separating where the manure is coming out of the animal and the ground floor of the courtyard. And therefore, Rava was certain that is not considered that it would be part of the courtyard. And so it does not belong to the landlord. It belongs to the owner. It belongs to the renter. Now, the Brisa seems to have a word missing. It says in the barn and in the chotzer, it belongs to, if it landed in the barn or it landed into the courtyard, it belongs to the landlord. Tarte, what do you mean? A barn and a courtyard? If there was a barn in the courtyard, then it belongs to the owner. Rav Ashi said, if you rented the courtyard, right? If you rented the courtyard and you didn't specify, let's say, the shed in the courtyard, then you didn't mean that the shed or the barn in the courtyard is in the rental agreement. No, you're just renting the place to, the open space, but not the private shed or barn in the courtyard. That was not part of the rental agreement. And therefore, if any manure lands in that shed in the chotzer, it belongs to the balabais, it belongs to the landlord. Anyway, one more question over here. Continues the Gemara, questioning this idea that if you have a courtyard that's fenced in, you can acquire items even without your awareness that the item is in your property. So the Brisa says, Yoine Shaivach, you have doves that let's do the Rashi. In other words, their nests are in the bird coop in your property, but how does the dove get its food? It goes to a field and collects food there. Right? So it's like freedom birds. It doesn't really belong to you, but they happen to nest in your property. Or doves that nest on your attic. They don't belong to you, and therefore, if you want to take the eggs, you have to do shluach hakan. But nobody is allowed to steal it because we want to keep the peace. So we consider it yours that nobody's allowed to take it, but you're still required to do shluach hakan because it's not considered yours. If you hold of what Rabbi Yosef and Chanina said, that your courtyard can acquire something without your awareness, so why is it not considered your birds? They're nesting on your property. That's not considered. The Torah says that if the birds belong to you, then there's no mitzvah of shiluach hakan. And here, why don't we say that your courtyard acquired those birds and therefore you're exempt from shluach hakan? Rava said, right, When the egg leaves the mother, most of the egg is out of the mother's back, then already if you want to take that egg, you have to send away the mother. But it does not become your egg until it actually lands into your chutzner, into your courtyard. And that's what we're talking about, that it didn't fully come out of the mother. So therefore, if you want to take the birds, they're not yours eggs. And therefore, you'd have to do shluach hakan. You'd have to do shluach hakam. When do we say the Brisa says that you're obligated to do a shluach hakam? It's before it fell into your courtyard. So the Gemara says, if so, why is somebody not allowed to steal it? You didn't acquire it yet. So the Gemara says, the mother. The mother of that is obviously in your courtyard that somebody's not allowed to take because of darchei shalom. If you want, I can tell you. Lo'ilam abeitzim. Lo'ilam, really, we're talking about the eggs, that you're not allowed to take the eggs. And even though you didn't acquire the eggs, there's still gezel somebody to take those eggs. Since most of the eggs came out of the mother, your intention is to get those eggs. And therefore, nobody else is allowed to take it from you. Now that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, no one is allowed to acquire those eggs as long as the mother's hovering over them. You have to send away the mother. Then only then can you take the eggs. But as long as the mother is on it, no one can acquire it. Even if it fell into your courtyard, you're still not acquiring the eggs. If you were allowed to acquire it, then your courtyard would have been able to acquire it on your behalf. Since in this case you cannot acquire it, those eggs, because Rabbi Yehuda Marav says that as long as is a special gzeirus hakasef, as long as the mother is on the eggs, you can own those eggs. First, you have to send away the mother, and then you could acquire the egg. So even if it's in your courtyard, you would not be able to acquire it. Your courtyard was not acquiring it. So they're basically free eggs. The bird is a free bird, and the eggs that happen to that they nested in your courtyard is not yours until you actually send away the mother. So then, if that's the case, then why can't anybody steal those eggs? Why is it also to steal those eggs? Because we want to keep the peace. Really, it belongs to nobody, those eggs, but we consider it your eggs. If you were Mekayim the mitzvah of shluach hakan, you sent away the mother, so now the eggs fully belong to you. Then it's really stealing. But if you didn't send away the mother, you still have to send away the mother in order to acquire it. So the Gemara says, "Bekotan de la bar shaluachu." We're talking about that it says darchei shalom is you didn't send away you didn't do shluach hakan, and really it's, let's say there's a cotton over there who's under bar mitzvah, a boy under bar mitzvah, and maybe he owns that courtyard and he can't send away the mother because there's no mitzvah shluach hakan on somebody under bar mitzvah. So then the Gemara says, "Cotton bar darchei shalom." Who? Why can't somebody take it? Do we have to keep the peace with a cotton? Cotton is somebody is not chayav b'mitzvahs and is not involved in business. So let somebody else take those eggs. It's not really the cotton's eggs. It just landed in a courtyard that belongs to him, but he didn't acquire those eggs, and he didn't work for those eggs. And says the Gemara Hachi Kama. This is what the Brisa means to say: Aviv shel cotton. The father of that cotton, the father can't take it because he has to keep the peace with his kid. His kid is thinking that this is my eggs, and therefore we're not going to allow the father to keep it without compensating his child for taking his eggs. Okay, so basically, but the basic idea still holds true that Reb Chanina said, the courtyard of a person can make acquisitions for you, provided, of course, the courtyard is surrounded by a fence, can make an acquisition even without your awareness. So now let's continue on with the Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Hamaske bais lechaver l'shana. If someone makes a price to rent his house to his friend for an entire year, so it's one whole year, and he gave the price. Let's say he said it'll be 12 dinners for the entire year. The Sabra Shana, but let's say the Bezdin now all of a sudden middle of the year made it a Iber Yar, so they made it a 13-month year. So so then the renter does not have to pay because the commitment was for an entire year and not anything else, not anything else. So even if Bezdin makes it now a 13-month year, all the renter still has to pay is 12 dinar. But if you made up one dinar every month, so nisabra shana, and let's say, so the commitment wasn't for an entire year; it's a month to month rental. So then, if they added an extra month to the year, another adar nisabra lemasker, then the landlord gets that extra rental fee. So for the entire year, he'll get 13 dinars instead of 12. And we have to speak out what the Gemara is going to say over here. That let's say the rental agreement said both. He says, I'm renting you for a year, and basically you're going to pay me 12 dinar for the entire year, 1 dinar per month. So he said both. I'm renting you a month to month and for the entire year. So now what do? Yeah, is it a monthly rental or is it a yearly rental? If it's a monthly rental, then the advantage goes to the landlord. If it's a yearly rental, then it's the advantage goes to the renter. So Maisa b'tzipari, there was a story in Tzipari, be'echat shesochar merchatz mechaber b'shnei masa zav lashana. A man rented a bathhouse from his friend for 12 gold coins for the year, medina zav lechodesh. And he said also that there's going to be each month should be 1 gold coin. So he said it's a yearly rental and a monthly rental. So we go to Oben Beis. And they said, we don't know what to do. Who wins? So we split. So instead of the renter paying a dinar zahav for the extra month, he'll pay a half a dinar zahav because we go like sumchas that whenever you have a doubt, who wins the case and doubt. So then you split the difference. So the renter will pay for half a month for the extra month that Bezdin added for the Iber Yar. And the Gemara explains, my solicitor, doesn't this story seem to contradict what you said before? So that you don't split either. So the Gemara says, this word's missing in the Mishnah, and this is what it should say. If you made up a deal, 12 zohav for a year from 1 dinar zahav for every chodesh, so you said it's a yearly rental and a monthly rental. So then yachleiku, and then Bezdin obviously made the year 13 months. Yachleiku, then you split the difference. Maisanami b'tzipari. That's the same story that happened in Tzipari. Right? Someone rented a merchatz from his friend. He said in the agreement that it's 12 gold coins for the year, and each gold coin is for a month. So it's a yearly rental, and he specifically stated that per month it's 1 dinar zahav. So the story came to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi that Bezdin now made it a 13-month year. What do you do? Does the renter have to pay, or does he not have to pay? When they said he pays for half the month. He pays for half the month because we don't know who's right over here. Is the landlord in the right or the renter is in the right? And because we haven't, we're in doubt over here. We go like sumches. That when you have a doubt, moment hamutul basafik, you have money that's in a doubt. You split the difference. Okay, we're going to stop over here.